evening and welcome to the Alchemical Tours podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hind.
So today I'm going to talk with Rob Harper, who's the director of the film Journeys to the Edge of Consciousness. This is an amazing and fascinating film that I was lucky enough to see an early preview of at Breaking Convention. I've been very fortunate to have Rob come to Bristol to talk about the film. So welcome, Rob.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what the film is about for those who haven't been fortunate enough to see it yet.
Okay. Journeys to the Edge of Consciousness is a part animated feature-length documentary about 3 psychedelic trips that changed the world forever. That's our tagline, if you like. That's our logline. The film features stories from kind of legends of the counterculture from the 1950s and 60s. So Timothy Leary, Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts. And what we've done is we've taken significant psychedelic experiences each of them had, and we've adapted them into short animations. And I then went and interviewed 12 leading current thinkers from the worlds of consciousness, psychedelics, psychiatry, meditation, etc., psychology, psychotherapy, and asked, sort of dragged these golden era 1960s psychedelic stories into the 21st century, and said, how are these relevant today? What can we learn from these early pioneers?
And who is your intended audience? Did you have, somebody in mind that this film was targeted at?
It's a really tricky one, audiences. You're always asked, who's this for? And, essentially my answer, which isn't a very good answer, is everybody. I would like to think everybody should see this film. On the one hand, I think, what I aimed to do was to condense a lot of hard-won wisdom, experience, and knowledge, and really condense that down into a 90-minute parcel that hopefully might help younger people who are curious about this subject matter avoid some of the major pitfalls and problems. And on the complete other end of the spectrum, I like to think that this film appeals to an older, more mature audience who perhaps are very familiar with these territories, and I hope that it brings a lot together and has something to offer them too.
Certainly the audience that I watched it with at Breaking Convention was a very diverse audience, from young to old, and everyone seemed to be very excited by it. I think the discussion could have gone on long into the night. So I certainly would recommend people go and see it. When did you have the idea for this film?
So the idea began brewing in me in 2014, which is about 5.5 years ago now. And it sort of circulated around the back of my brain for the best part of that year, and I was doing lots of research and reading and thinking, and then I sat down. Work proper began in January 2015, when I sat down with a blank Word document in front of me and began adapting the job of adapting these stories and trying to select and distill a bit these thrilling and fascinating stories down into something more concise and perhaps more engaging.
One of the things I was interested in is why you chose animation to tell the story.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, to answer that, first off, the reason I went back to the 1950s and the 1960s was because, you know, I sort of said, okay, who are the elders, at least in the West, who are our elders? Who are the elders around this subject of consciousness and consciousness expansion? And I know that in other cultures they have traditions going back thousands of years that understand these places. In the West, it feels like we're much less mature, perhaps, in our understanding and experience of these altered or expanded states of consciousness. But I wanted to, at that point, 5 odd years ago, I was saying, okay, who can I go back to? And that took me back to Leary and Huxley and Watts, and it seems like to me, I know there were other people who perhaps encountered some of these substances and these states earlier, but in particular these people were so good at expressing. You know, they were all writers and thinkers, and they were so good at expressing what they'd experienced to others. That's why I didn't take stories from 2015, you know. So for one thing, all these authors were now dead. Their experiences, you know, there was nothing to draw on really in terms of the archives. And it's, you know, I was faced with the question of, you know, I'd come across these stories that somehow just screamed to me that they had to be told. They had to be shared with a modern audience. For instance, I remember that moment in Timothy Leary's story, for people who have already seen the film, where he's confronted with his daughter, and he's confronted with the sort of the superficiality of his relationship with his teenage daughter, and the tragedy of that. That scene, I remember reading that, just leapt off the page at me and just hit me right in the skin and went, wow. And animation was really the only way I could think to share that in a way that was engaging, really.
And what were your sources for these stories?
They're all from books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Timothy Leary's story originated from his book High Priest, which is an absolutely brilliant collection of short stories. They're all trip reports from Leary, and they're just, for me, there's a lot of people have a very love-hate relationship with Timothy Leary. For me, he's just a brilliant writer and a hilarious writer. There are moments in that book that are just hilarious. And Aldous Huxley's was drawn from his book, his essay or book, The Doors of Perception. And, you know, that went on to influence a whole generation, really, you know, right down to popular culture, you know, and the band The Doors, Jim Morrison's band The Doors, named that essay by Huxley, who himself had borrowed that title from William Blake. One other thing to add on the animation front is that we were absolutely certain from the beginning that we wanted to avoid all of the usual kind of tie-dyed cliches that are there when you talk about the 1960s and psychedelia. And so the trips themselves aren't sort of filled with wishy-washy, swirly colours. Quite restrained, I feel. And I think that adds to the power of them, personally, as well.
So, you know, I think one amazing thing about the film is the great production values on the small budget. So I'm guessing it's been a labour of love, and you've had some very good, you know, friends and colleagues and favours, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, all of that. It's been a five-year process getting this film done, and for me, the word, you know, labour of love is exactly what it was. You know, I knew I had to get this film done. I knew this film needed to be made. And somehow it seems the universe chose me as the person to make it. It hasn't always been easy, hasn't always been straightforward. And it's been a real exercise in less is more and in economising. And the only way that has been possible has been, as you say, pulling in a lot of favours from a lot of very talented people who've contributed to the project, from the music composer, Bruce Gainsford, to the dubbing mixer, who mixed the sound, Luke, who shot the interviews, and all the way along I've just been lucky to have really talented people contributing their time to the project. I think if you approach people right, with the right intention, and they see that you're really serious about this thing and passionate about this thing, they buy into it. People can be really generous with their time and energies, is what I've found, and that's what's made this film possible, really.
When somebody has a selfless intent to create something that's kind of come from somewhere almost fully formed, and you're just bringing it to life, then it's like breathing life into something. You've created something that's got a life of its own somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely had the feeling on the making of this that the film was coming through me, that this film was coming through me, and I was just the guy who sort of dealt with some of the details. I think there is something about now that is crystallising around consciousness, and it's been both a blessing and a curse. Mostly a blessing to have been the person to bring this thing into the world. I'm really happy and proud.
Well, I'm sure obsessive child that you've created has its own demands as well. Yes.
Now it's finished. Letting it off into the world, it really did feel like a child leaving home to go off into the wide world and meet people I'm never going to meet and explore parts of the world I'm never going to go to. Yeah, and that's quite exciting.
So let's go back and just drill down a little bit into how the film's structured. So there are, would you call them chapters or stories? Chapters. So we've got Timothy Leary. Mm-hmm. We've got Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts. Mm-hmm. And it's in that order, is it?
It is.
Yeah. I remember in Breaking Convention we were discussing what order chronologically they should be in and why they were in that order. Perhaps you could tell us why you chose that order.
Yeah, sure. So, in strict chronological order, it was Huxley's experience actually happened about nearly 10 years before the other two. I think it was 1953. And then I think Leary's was 60 and Watts was 61. Don't quote me on that. But we're in that ballpark, early 60s. And so the reason I didn't construct the film in that chronological order, and different, in the edit, different chronologies were tried and tested. But in the end, there's a very specific reason why the film unfolds in that order with these three chapters. Firstly, we have Timothy Leary's first ever LSD trip, which was a kind of all-enveloping, utterly overwhelming, he describes it as a kind of shattering confrontation with the universe. So in a way, the idea behind this structure was to take the audience on a specific journey. Firstly, we have this overwhelming, overpowering, and kind of very nihilistic experience of Leary's. He ends up saying, well, if everything's just a bunch of particles whizzing around and, all form is essentially meaningless, why does anything mean anything? And I think that had some very useful implications for him. It made him question the sort of rigmarole of his daily life routines as a Harvard professor, and his rabid focus on climbing higher up the social ladder, the sort of ladder of status and influence and power. But on the other hand, it sort of left him flapping in the wind a bit of who am I and what does anything mean? Mm. So really what I wanted to do was hit the audience with that out the door. We've taken on quite a difficult and challenging journey with Leary, and him and hopefully we are forced to confront some quite difficult and uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about himself. Chapter 2, then we go with Aldous Huxley into the doors of perception, his first experience of a psychedelic, in this case it's mescaline, administered by psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond. And I think what Huxley's journey takes us is somewhere a bit different. After the shock of Leary's, with Huxley we're taken into the natural world, and we're shown the beauty and the magnificence of the everyday natural world around us. You know, he sits and stares at a vase full of flowers for an hour or however long, and completely loses himself in them. And he then contrasts that against the sort of plasticky, superficial, man-made world that he finds himself in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles in 1953, and the sort of the tinny superficiality of the man-made in contrast to the natural. And then a third step in our journey with Alan Watts is Joyous Cosmology. Watts is again led down a pretty difficult road deep down inside himself, through all of his social masks and games and ploys and strategies for survival. But beyond that, what he's shown is that the behind the most mundane and dull and dusty corner gas station attendant is, hiding is the divine. That inside all of us, beyond all of our crap and all of our games, is something quite special and divine. So that's the journey I wanted to take the audience on, and that's the reason we did them in the order we did.
I guess one thing I wondered was were there other stories that you had considered telling in that sequence, or could be told in another film, Hoffman, or what about, I don't know, I could, you could think of other figures in there like Terence McKenna or whatever. What did you sort of play around with other choices, or have you got other choices in mind?
Yeah, so it Journeys began its life with a short list of about, I think I had about 12 stories lined up, and I adapted them all into scripts, like these three. And somehow that 12 was whittled down to 8, and somehow that 8 was whittled down to 4. And then, regrettably, number 4 didn't come through for various reasons. And so I was left with 3. So it was quite a kind of natural, organic process. And yeah, it's left me with plenty of material that could end up in a sequel, potentially.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what it was about those 3 stories, but I think there was a power and I think perhaps what that divided them from some others was just their craft as writers. Those 3 guys, as just their ability to communicate such a complex, subjective, internal experience in a way that I could completely be there with them, just through black letters on a white page.
Yeah.
I think that's what stood them apart for me.
And in some ways, I think that has been one of the marks of certainly the sort of psychedelic Renaissance figures, that they've been kind of poets or bards or writers who've been able to communicate their experience. I suspect there are many people who've had the same experience but have never been able to communicate it, or have never been in a position to communicate it. So in some ways I felt these 3 are communicating something that's happening for the zeitgeist of that particular time as well. I don't know how you feel. They're all coming out of the 60s, out of that time. So that time itself seems to be very important for this film. Yeah,
absolutely. And they all have that in common. Yeah, I think it would have been weird if one of the stories was from contemporary. And there were some contemporary stories in that short list. For instance, someone like, all 3 of them, but someone like Huxley, he was an intellectual, an absolute intellectual, and an artist, a novelist. But that man was so well read. He had so much to draw on, as did Alan Watts, in terms of comparative religion, in terms of understanding of Eastern traditions and Eastern religions. So, these, and during the Doors of Perception, just for instance, or the Joyous Cosmology, he's drawing on ancient Buddhist wisdom, and he's drawing on, modern analytical psychology. And, there's so much, these people had so much depth there that, it was such a fascinating experiment for them to meet with psychedelics. It's so it wasn't just these substances or these experiences. It was the launch pad from which these three were launching. It was very different, but in different ways. They were already very interesting, creative, intelligent people.
I mean, if you contrast that creativity of the 60s, these figures kind of epitomise, but there are others. There's also the art forms that came out at that time, fueled by that sort of psychedelic rocket fuel somehow, and it seems such a contrast today that the sort of psychedelic story now is about scientific papers on medical cannabis, or whether big pharma should take these seriously, or it seems to have become more analytical and plain and less creative and less getting in touch with the divine and more the mundane. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I think certainly the what's quite exciting and interesting for many is that every other week there's a new article in the Guardian or whatever about possibilities for using these substances to treat depression, to treat anxiety, to help traumatized veterans with suffering from PTSD, which is fantastic, which is amazing, and it's so good that these serious, hardworking, professional people are out there doing this work and saying, "Hey, these things really might have something to offer." But I think and I think that's perhaps seems to be the way that our very left-brained, rational statistics figures minded current public space perhaps it sees them, accepts them more readily in that form, and so great. But I think what needs to be not forgotten in the background of all of that is, okay, how are these substances potentially helping these all of us with our suffering, and what might they offer? And if we scratch the surface of these medical trials, what's happening is it seems these substances are able to provoke deep and meaningful mystical religious experiences, call them what you will, people are able to have, and people are guided back to their early traumas or to whatever pain, suffering, difficulty they've held on to and sort of sat with for much of their lives. But at its heart, what it seems, I think meaning is a key word here. And I think whether we're talking about it, whether we're more comfortable talking about it in terms of religion, whether we're more comfortable talking about it in terms of spirituality, whether we're more comfortable about talking about it in terms of meaning. I think one of our central problems affecting, for instance, the people are talking about this kind of epidemic of depression that's currently sweeping the UK and other parts of the modern Western world. We have labour-saving devices, that do the work of 12 hired house servants. You know, we sort of have it all at our fingertips. And yet we live lives that are very, very impoverished in terms of meaning and in terms of connection. And I would say both with ourselves and with others and with the natural world around us. And so the reason the film perhaps, you know, drives less from that sort of neuroscience, medical-driven perspective is exactly that. I mean, for me, at its very heart, this is not a film about psychedelic drugs. And for a while, you know, what's behind that? Well, it's in a sense, it's a film about expanded states of consciousness, full stop, which can be achieved through a variety of means. But recently, I've gone a step further than that, and it's not a film about psychedelic drugs, and it's not a film about expanded states of consciousness. For me, it's a film that tells the story of three men going through, or three human beings going through the very difficult and painful process of making contact with themselves in a society where you're not encouraged to be in contact with yourself. So that's one of the threads I see in common in three stories, in Journeys, is these three men going through the painful and difficult process of making contact with themselves.
Yeah. No, I think that's very nice to make that connection between, you know, these seemingly, you know, kind of mystical, expanded states of consciousness stories and the, you know, therapeutic use today and the medical use today, and the fact that, you know, meaning and getting back in touch with the environment and with ourselves is perhaps, you know, the alchemical elixir, the magical ingredient that has been lacking, and you know, that does seem to be coming out of some of the research in, you know, such as the research in Johns Hopkins University, that the factor of people saying they had some sort of mystical experience is often a factor with some good outcome, medical outcome. So, you know, I think there's kind of mounting evidence for that being the case. So, you know, I think that really is interesting. I think bringing this back to the film, you know, one of the things that I found very helpful was the iconic interviews with this sort of group of, you know, I think you called them the elders. You know, somehow they the wise elders of our tribe who seem to suddenly come to your aid when they knew you were making a wise film. And you know, I'm very interested in that group of people, what they had to say, because they were teasing out some of these points that you've just been making and putting these journeys into context in a very helpful way, and bringing new perspective. So tell us a little bit about these iconic interviews. How on earth did you get these amazing people to come and be part of this project? Was it blackmail? Did you pay them? Kidnap their children?
None of the above, I'm afraid. I just asked. I approached them all, and I said, "This is who I am, and this is what I'm doing, and would you willing to be a part?" And they were all extremely generously said yes, or foolishly, or however you want to put it. But no blackmail required, luckily.
Had they all seen the film at that point? Were the stories kind of fleshed out? Was there something to show them?
Differing degrees, because the interviews were shot over the course of a kind of 18-month, 2-year period, I think. You know, so it was here and there. So and we were building the film as it went. But with the vast majority of those interviews, the animations albeit in kind of very basic skeletal black and white form, were there. And actually were used as discussion points for the interviews. So I would play them Leary's trip, and then we would talk about it. Then I would play them Huxleys, and then we would talk about it. So it was no small ask. It took 3 or 4 hours to get through the 3 animations and to talk about them with each person. And I just feel incredibly lucky to have had the opportunity to sit down with Gabor Mate, Graham Hancock, Dennis McKenna, all 12 of them without exception. I'm incredibly lucky to have sat down with these people who've spent their lifetimes learning and coming across these insights and this wisdom the hard way, and being able to just sit down with them and talk about this was I was in my element. It was great fun, and I think they all enjoyed it too. We weren't just sitting around in the abstract talking about the broader themes of, because there are probably many existing films that cover that territory, and I think what this fairly unique format of having these animated stories and then discussing them within the film gave us a chance to do that. And it also gave us a chance to sort of learn from them and say, okay, what didn't they do so well? What wasn't good about Timothy Leary taking 5 times the normal dose of LSD in a strange setting with a strange man he didn't know?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Just so people know, and also just for my benefit as well, just remind us who the different people are and that you've got doing the interviews. So you've got Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
Run through those names for us again.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the people interviewed in the film, there are 12 in all.
Yeah.
12 fantastic people. We've got Graham Hancock, Gabor Mate, Dennis McKenna, Rick Doblin, Amanda Fielding, Maria Papaspyrou, Tim Reed, David Luke, Ben Sessa, Yanai Postelnik, Holly Harmon, and William Rowlandson.
I mean, for people who don't know, that is a totally outstanding cast of experts. How on earth did you manage to choose where to put these different interviews and so on? I mean, it just seems to me an amazing job, but how on earth you did it, I have no idea.
Yeah, so I mean, not all, but a large number of my interviewees were recruited through Breaking Convention, which is this biannual conference organised by Ben and David and a few other very, very skilled other people. And what it offers, what it creates, is this incredible, unique space where loads of people come together from all over the world to talk about psychedelics and everything and anything connected to them in a very fun, free and creative atmosphere. So and the guys behind Breaking Convention, many of whom are in the film, have been real supporters of the project from the start. So that was a real help. I don't think I could tell you. It's everything from happenstance to luck to chance to whatever that led to it being these 12 and not another 12. But as you say, they are key voices in the current psychedelic renaissance. What people are calling it, this movement, this eruption of consciousness that's going on. And as you say, they represent a diverse. They're all coming from different points of view. They're all coming from different perspectives. They all had something really important to bring to the table, all 12 of them. And I had no idea if showing 3 animations and then having people talk about them was going to work. And luckily it did, I think.
Yeah, and I'm also impressed about how openly and freely these people talked. They're talking from their own personal experience. And I think, they're to call them kind of the wise elders, I think is a good way of talking about them. They somehow represent reference points for, you said initially the film perhaps is targeted at young people or people trying to find out what the whole, psychedelic or journey to a state of expanded consciousness might involve. And this sort of group of gatekeepers, if you like, are giving wise and cautionary advice, aren't they, on that landscape somehow?
Yeah, and it was so important for me throughout the film to emphasise, which they did again and again, that it's, whenever they're talking about this potential use of psychedelics, it's always, as Gabor Mate says, a question of context, of your intention and guidance, during the experience, that you're held and guided through this. Because quite rightly, as Rick Doblin points out, these things are like a knife. They're not magic pills that someone pops and all your problems are sorted, and suddenly you're a wise and enlightened being.
Yeah.
They can have incredibly destructive effects if abused, misused, or taken too lightly. So it's certainly not at all, the argument of the film that this is a simple, straightforward, or easy process. It's more an investigation of, okay, it looks like what these people are trying to tell us is that these substances, carefully and responsibly used, may offer us something, some new perspective, some way out of this current crisis we're in. And I think we're in quite deep right now. But what's being said is that the road out of it, one has to go inside, one has to look at oneself, and that is not going to be a quick and easy process.
I guess the question is, what is the current crisis, and how do these how does this film kind of offer hope, I guess, is the maybe it's a big ask or a big thing, but at Breaking Convention we also had the Extinction Rebellion people there, didn't we, this time, and there was kind of a big, I hadn't quite realised the big role psychedelics had played in the Extinction Rebellion. So the Breaking Convention itself seems to be on the sort of hell mouth of the crisis, doesn't it? Sort of trying to kind of see how changing meaning and the way people perceive the world could address some of that.
Yeah, well, I my motivation behind making this film, for the last 5 years, has been to be in the service of hope.
Yeah,
I guess, I think there's the age-old adage that in order to change the world, we need to change ourselves.
Yeah,
that perhaps the most effective work anyone can do is to take a good hard look inside and see what beyond our sort of perhaps rose-tinted sense of ourselves we each like to see. It's kind of, how am I actually relating on a day-to-day basis to myself, to the people near me, to the environment around me? What am I contributing? What am I not contributing? That's not to say, and this balance between interior work and exterior work is a really important one. And Gail Bradbrook's talk at Breaking Convention was all about that, really. And importance, you can't have one without the other. This can't be sort of indulgent navel gazing. And I think, without wanting to drop a spoiler, the film ends with Gabor Mate talking about, he quotes Thomas Merton, a sort of famous 20th century Catholic monk. And he quotes Thomas Merton and talks about gaining possession of ourselves, you know, reclaiming ourselves. And he says in order to reclaim ourselves, we need to have a taste of victory. And more importantly, we need to decide for ourselves that we prefer victory to defeat. Because I think a lot of us in this kind of non-stop media world, where somehow this surreal Alice in Wonderland world where Donald Trump and Boris Johnson have their hands on the levers of power. You know, a lot of people's response to that is to feel pretty defeated.
Yes.
And that one can't make a difference.
Yes.
And I think what Gabor Mate is saying through introducing us to Thomas Merton is to kind of reignite that fight, that hunger to see a better world.
Yes.
And what Mate suggests is that perhaps these substances, or the expanded states, the new perspectives that these substances can offer us, might give us that taste of victory, might give us a snapshot, a snippet of something that we then, as Hancock says, need to take back to our daily lives and work on and work with.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I guess one relationship between those early 1960s pioneers and today is that maybe we're starting to find out how to make that connection, how to integrate these experiences in therapy, in medical use, in how we work with the environment and the climate crisis. So maybe we have learned something in the last 50 years that, you know, these stories sort of had started something, and the spokespeople you've got today are the inheritors of that. But they've evolved and they've grown and they've now adapted to what we require now, which is not Yellow Submarine or tie-dye or Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds or.
I think it is this thing of integration is the question, I think, and otherwise, is all this just a means of escape? Is this just it can very easily potentially fall into a kind of an exciting escape for people from a quite difficult and challenging, reality. And so it is the question that is posed at the end of the film is, how willing are each one of us to do the work that's being asked of us. That you're offered a glimpse of something, you're offered a different perspective on something, and then what are you going to do next? So I would agree with you, that these guys are the next generation.
So I guess the question is, how can people see this film? Where is it showing? I mean, having heard you talk about it, everyone now wants to rush out and see the film that hasn't seen it. Where are the best places to see? Can they see the film in the cinemas? Can they see it online?
Yeah, so the film is currently available to rent or buy online to stream. If you go to the film website, www.journeysmovie.com, there'll be links to rent or buy the film. It's available through Vimeo and Amazon. On top of that, we are asking for people to really help participate in the distribution of this film, to help us get the film out there to more, because we are, we don't have big backers and a huge advertising budget and an existing distribution chain of cinemas. this film is doing things a bit differently. It's saying things a bit differently. So what we're asking people is, if you see the film and you like it and you feel like maybe you want to share it with others, if you feel maybe this is something other people need to see, organise a screening, organise a local screening in your area. And I'm getting emails on an almost daily basis from people all over the UK and also all over the world. Recently it's been Slovenia, Ecuador, Sweden, Australia, New Zealand, various parts of North and South America, literally, pretty much every continent, which is just fantastic and so exciting. And that ranges from, I think this weekend I've got a medical student in Canada inviting 20 of her friends over to her flat for a screening, and they're asking for donations on the door, and they're very kindly going to contribute those donations towards the costs of making this film. And on the other hand, we've got the Australian premiere of Journeys happening next month in a cinema in Melbourne, Australia, with a few hundred people in attendance. So it could be anything from hiring your local cinema to opening out your living room to to your extended circle. Please get in touch with us. We will let you know how to organise a screening and the ins and outs. And please help to spread the word.
That's fantastic. And I think I've watched it individually and I've watched it with a group of people. And it's often great fun to watch it with a group of people and discuss it afterwards. And kind of setting up something like that. If people can do that, that's that creates a thoughtful response, and you find you learn other things from other people around you. I'm think people should just watch this film. And this film, I think one of the things about the psychedelic movement is that it's been kind of an underground force since the early 60s, and a lot of people have wanted to kind of discover and learn about psychedelics, and now in the age of the internet, people go out and they find out these different bits of materials and films and talks and things that kind of give them another piece of the puzzle. They might discover Alan Watts talks, or they might discover Terence McKenna, or whatever it is, and they might discover Joe Rogan's podcast, and there's a series of things you might discover. I think this is a film that I would say that all young people should watch. It would give them a kind of proper education into how to sensibly place psychedelics in their worldview, rather than taking a rather perhaps unskillful or tutored path through potentially dangerous territory. So I think it's got huge value. Now the question that I must ask is, are you already thinking about the next film, or is it all about shepherding this new film into the world and resting a little bit and enjoying the success?
It's a great question. I think after 5 long hard years, it's been a pleasure and a relief to let the film out into the world. And there is still shepherding to be done. I am still, making all sorts of wonderful contacts with people, organisations, conferences all over the world who are contacting me and wanting to screen the film and wanting to share the film with others. Right now I've got people, again, very kindly giving their time to donating their time to translate the film into. I've got people working on it in about 5 different languages now.
Yes.
We're releasing the German subtitles next month.
Yeah, fantastic.
Which I'm really excited about, bringing it to the German-speaking world.
Yes.
And again, if anyone listening feels drawn, please, visit the website and you'll find the means to contact us if you feel called to translate the film into your native language, to share it with your country. I'm not quite sure what. So that's me at the moment. I'm sort of
Yeah,
enjoying
Yes,
enjoying
yeah.
a bit of time off from the very
mm,
intense
mm,
process of making it
mm,
and shepherding it,
mm.
through into the world. And there are all sorts of possibilities in the back of my mind. So we will watch this space, I would say.
Yes, yeah. I'm guessing if what the way you've described this film, the next film will kind of present itself and take hold of you at the right time. There will be a natural process to the next story that needs to be told. But I'd like to thank you very much, Rob, for this interview. It's really been very interesting for me personally, and the film is an outstanding piece of work. And I hope in some small way this podcast episode will lead other people to enjoy the film and to share it with other people.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
You've been listening to the Alchemical Tours podcast by Dr. Stephen Hine. You can subscribe via iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Mixcloud, and other well-known platforms. Please do not forget to recommend and rate us. If you have any comments, ideas, or corrections, please do not hesitate to email us at podcast@alchemicaltours.com or contact us via Facebook or Twitter. We always love to hear from you. This podcast is community funded and not for profit. To support us, please subscribe to our Patreon page at patreon.com/alchemicaltours. Until next time, this is the Alchemical Tours podcast, and thank you for listening.